Facing laughter and contemptuous looks, she kept her eyes on the ground. Then at the altar he did something that stopped even the soldiers and transformed humiliation into honor. Subscribe to the channel and discover what happened. The cell. Ceremonial grounds were set up on the banks of the Xingu River, surrounded by colorful banners and soldiers with empty gazes. The humid afternoon heat made the officers' medals gleam in the light, but there was no brightness in the eyes surrounding Aparecida. She kept her head down, restless fingers intertwined over the white dress, already stained by the red earth and the shame she carried. It was the wedding of a young woman nobody wanted, forced by her own father, Colonel Mendonça, commander of the military post at Villanova, to go to the altar as a form of punishment. The reason everyone knew and commented on without shame: she wasn't beautiful, never had been. The beauty they expected, delicate, soft, charming, had never blossomed on her face, marked by expressions too intense for the standards of marriageable young women in the region. Because of this, she was offered to a Kalapalo chief as a coin of mockery and political bargaining, an agreement to pacify territorial tensions growing on the border between the military post and indigenous lands. The ceremony, although presented as official, had the taste of a cruel farce. Soldiers laughed behind her back while local authorities whispered, observing the unfolding of that spectacle. It was a union made not by desire, but by calculated humiliation. Colonel Mendonça, a man hardened by power and by the frustration of having a daughter he considered a social embarrassment, saw in Aparecida's handover a way to punish both her and the Kalapalo people who defied his authority in the region, and the one chosen for the marriage was Ubirajara, a warrior of proud posture, face marked by traditional paintings and a past enigmatic to the white men. No one understood why he had accepted such an arrangement. Some said it was to protect ancestral lands, others that it was a strategy to know the enemy from within, but the truth did not dwell in the rumors that ran through the village. When the moment of the vow arrived, Aparecida trembled like a buriti palm leaf in the wind. The barely contained laughter of the soldiers cut through the air like sharpened machetes. She couldn't face the groom. She awaited the final rejection, the public disdain that would be the apex of her humiliation, but she was surprised by a silence different from anything she had ever known. Not a cold silence, but a silence filled with dignity. Ubirajara stepped forward, with no rush at all. In his hands he carried a yellow ipi flower, small, resilient, of unusual beauty for that scene of tension. He knelt before her, holding the flower like someone carrying an ancestral secret, and said in clear Portuguese so everyone could hear, "You are like the strength of the earth, one who does not seek to please empty eyes, but who sustains the world in her silence." The laughter ceased immediately. A soldier choked on his own saliva. Another lowered his gaze, suddenly interested in his own boots. Colonel Mendonça, for a moment, seemed to lose his breath, as if he had taken an invisible blow to the chest. "And Aparecida," she cried, not from pain or shame, but from profound astonishment. She had never been seen that way. No one had ever looked beyond her appearance. The ceremony continued under a silence heavy with discomfort. There was no mocking celebration that the soldiers had planned. They returned to their quarters with heads bowed, unable to explain the unease they felt. Meanwhile, the Kalapalo entourage led the new wife with solemn respect. When they arrived at the village situated in a clearing embraced by the dense forest, Aparecida was received with circular dances, traditional songs, and a necklace of painted seeds, a symbol of acceptance and dignity among that people. At first, she didn't know where to fix her gaze. She feared that at any moment she would be reminded that she didn't belong to that place, that she was just part of a political agreement. But days turned into weeks, and no one treated her with contempt. The women invited her to participate in harvesting manioc and preparing beiju. The children, especially little Jandira, a 5-year-old girl with a leg atrophied by a childhood disease, approached curiously, touching her different hair and clothes. Ubirajara, the same one who had knelt before her at the ceremony, treated her with the same respect with which he addressed the village elders. He never exalted her with false flatteries, but also never diminished her. It was as if he had known her forever, as if he could see something that not even she could see. Gradually, Aparecida began to look at herself in the crystalline waters of the river, no longer with repulsion but with genuine curiosity. She discovered that her voice had firmness when narrating stories to the children, that her hands were skilled at learning to weave straw for baskets, that her presence brought calm in moments of tension, and that her ability to listen was valued by the village elders. However, the shadow of the military post still loomed over the village. Colonel Mendonça, furious with the unexpected result of his humiliation plan, began to articulate new attacks against Kalapalo territory. In his meetings with regional authorities, he declared that he would recover his daughter and punish those who kept her in captivity against her will, completely inverting the truth of the facts. Dona Zuleide, a midwife and healer, respected both in the village and in Villanova, moved between the two worlds carrying news and rumors. It was she who brought the warning. The colonel had given an ultimatum. In 7 days he would send soldiers to rescue his daughter, using this as a pretext for an invasion long planned. The news fell like a storm over the community. The elders gathered in council, debating what to do in the face of the threat. Some defended resistance, others negotiation. The tension grew, while the fatal deadline approached like a heavy cloud on the horizon. Aparecida, who now began to understand her place in that complex plot, observed everything with eyes that were no longer those of the humiliated girl, say, the riverside. Something was awakening within her, something that had perhaps always been there, just waiting for the right moment to bloom like an epee in dry land. That night, as the crescent moon illuminated the village with its silver light, Aparecida couldn't find sleep. Sitting at the entrance of the hut she shared with Ubirajara, she watched the shadows dance among the trees. 6 days remained in her father's ultimatum. 6 days before the world she was beginning to know could crumble. Her thoughts were interrupted by the silent approach of little Jandira, who limped slightly supported by a staff made of carved wood. The girl sat beside her without asking permission, with the naturalness of children. "Are you afraid?" asked the little one, her large eyes reflecting the stars. Aparecida hesitated before answering. She had learned in the village that lying to a child was like planting a rotten seed. Nothing good could grow from it. "I am," she finally confessed, "but not for myself." Jandira nodded as if she understood perfectly, though she was only 5 years old. Grandma Jurema says that fear is like a snake. It cannot be ignored or confronted without wisdom. The wisdom of the girl, who carried in her atrophied leg the marks of her own struggle, touched Aparecida deeply. She put her arm around the child's fragile shoulders, feeling a connection she had never experienced before. Jandira was considered special in the village, not despite her disability, but because of it. The Kalapalo believed that people like her saw beyond the visible world, serving as a bridge between dimensions. Therefore, she was raised with special care by the elders, especially by old Jurema, guardian of the most ancient traditions of the people. The next morning, Aparecida went to seek the elder Jurema, who lived in a hut apart, close to the riverbank. The old woman, her face marked by time like the trunk of a centenary jataba tree, was weaving fibers while humming softly. Without raising her eyes from her work, she spoke as soon as Aparecida approached. "I knew you would come. The river told me last night." Aparecida was no longer surprised by such statements. She had learned that in that culture, nature spoke constantly. One just needed to know how to listen. "I need advice," she said, sitting before the elder. "I don't want to be the cause of suffering for these people." Jurema finally raised her gaze, her eyes blurred by age, seeming to see through Aparecida. "The seed does not choose where it falls, but it chooses whether to sprout or not. You have already made your choice when you allowed your heart to take root here." The elder's words reverberated inside Aparecida like distant drums. It was true. Something had sprouted within her in those months, something that didn't exist when she lived under her father's oppressive shadow. "But what can I do? He will come with weapons and men. I don't want blood to be spilled because of me." Jurema set aside her weaving and took Aparecida's hands between, her own rough and warm like stones in the sun. You have a gift that you still don't recognize. You see people as they truly are, beyond the masks. That's why OBLIGADA chose you. The revelation struck Aparecida like lightning on a clear day. What do you mean, May chose me? It was my father who arranged this marriage as punishment. An enigmatic smile formed on Jurema's wrinkled face. Your father proposed, yes, but before that OBLIGADA had already seen you. For months he observed you when he went to the village. He saw how you treated the poorest at the market, how you defended children when soldiers frightened them, how you listened to stories from old people whom everyone ignored. Aparecida felt the world spin around her. She remembered the times she had felt being observed in the village, the strange sensations she had when visiting the market. Why did he never tell me this? Because OBLIGADA knows that certain truths need to be discovered, not revealed, answered the elder, returning to her weaving as if the conversation had reached exactly the point it should. Now go, talk to your husband. The path reveals itself to those who have the courage to take the first step. That afternoon, Aparecida found OBLIGADA in the clearing where the men trained with bows and clubs. He interrupted the exercises upon seeing her approach with unusual determination in her gaze. Without words, they walked to the riverbank, a place where important conversations happened. There, seated on stones polished by time, she broke the silence. Jurema told me that you observed me before all this. OBLIGADA showed no surprise. His face, normally impassive, softened slightly. Old Jurema speaks when the time is right. He picked up a pebble and threw it into the water, creating concentric circles on the crystal surface. The first time I saw you, you were defending an herb seller whom soldiers accused of witchcraft. You were alone against 3 armed men. You didn't win the argument, but you didn't step back an inch. Aparecida remembered the episode. Old Conceição, who sold medicinal herbs and was constantly persecuted by superstition. I only did what any decent person would do. No, OBLIGADA cut in firmly. Any decent person would have looked away and continued on their path. You confronted. It's different. The silence that followed was filled by the singing of birds and the constant murmur of the river. Aparecida felt something growing in her chest. It wasn't exactly pride, but recognition of herself through the eyes of another. When your father proposed the marriage as an insult, I saw the opportunity the Great Spirit offered, continued OBLIGADA, not just for you to escape that life, but for our people to gain someone who sees beyond appearances. Tears began to roll down Aparecida's face without her being able to control them. They weren't tears of sadness, but of deep understanding. For the first time, she clearly saw the role she could play. She wasn't a victim of circumstances, but the protagonist of her own story. What will we do about the ultimatum? She finally asked, wiping her face with renewed determination. OBLIGADA stood up, offering his hand to help her. We won't face your father with weapons. That would only confirm the image he paints of us. We need another path. That night, the village council gathered. Elders, warriors, and the most respected women formed a circle around the central fire. For the first time, Aparecida was invited to sit among them, not as OBLIGADA's wife, but as a community member with her own voice. The debate was intense. Some defended temporary abandonment of the village, retreating to more isolated territories until the threat passed. Others argued for the need to form alliances with neighboring tribes for resistance. The tension grew along with the flames of the fire. It was then that little Jandira, who had been observing everything hidden among the shadows, limped to the center of the circle. The immediate silence that fell revealed the respect everyone had for the special child. The solution is not here, she said, with the surprising clarity she sometimes demonstrated. It's in the village. All eyes turned to the girl, who pointed directly at Aparecida. She needs to return, not as a prisoner, but as a messenger. The child's words fell like stones in the lake of collective consciousness, creating waves of understanding that spread through the circle. OBLIGADA was the first to nod, followed by the elders. Aparecida felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, but also an inexplicable certainty that this was the path. 5 days remained in the ultimatum. The plan began to take shape in the minds and hearts of those whom Aparecida now considered her true family. The morning that preceded Aparecida's departure dawned heavy with fog, as if the Xingu River itself exhaled apprehension. 4 days remained. In Colonel Mendonça's ultimatum. 4 days to change the course of a history that seemed written with the ink of prejudice and power. In Jurema's hut, final preparations were being made. The elder passed copaiba oil on Aparecida's hair while reciting ancient words in the Kalapalo language. They weren't spells, as the white men might think, but protective blessings. "Remember," said the old woman with a firm voice despite her age, "you do not go as a supplicant, but as a bridge between worlds." Aparecida nodded, feeling the weight of the special necklace she now carried. Made with jaguar teeth, red urucum seeds and macaw feathers, it was a symbol of spiritual authority rarely granted to someone not born in the tribe. At her side, little Jandira observed everything with attentive eyes, firmly holding a small package of leaves that contained a secret gift. "This is for when fear is greater than courage," said the girl, delivering the package with solemnity disproportionate to her size. "Only open it when you are alone facing your greatest challenge." Aparecida accepted the mysterious gift, keeping it close to her heart. The bond she had developed with the child transcended words. It was as if Jandira were the mirror of her own vulnerability, transformed into strength. In the central clearing, Ubirajara waited along with 5 warriors chosen to accompany Aparecida to the border between territories. They would go no further. Aparecida's mission was to enter Vila Nova alone, confronting her father on his own ground. When she arrived for the farewell, Ubirajara did not show the concern he felt. Instead, he offered her a ceremonial club too small for combat, but loaded with political meaning. "To remind you that you speak not only for yourself, but for all of us." The journey through the forest was silent and tense. The warriors moved, like shadows among the dense vegetation, alert to any sign of military patrols. Aparecida, although less agile than her companions, was surprised by her own resistance. Months living in the village had strengthened not only her spirit, but also her body. By dusk they reached the last elevation before Vila Nova. From there, they could see the lights beginning to turn on in the houses and the movement of soldiers. At the military post, it was the moment of separation. Ubirajara took Aparecida's hands between his own, eyes to eyes. There were no passionate kisses or grand declarations. It wasn't their way. There was only truth in that gaze, a deep understanding that dispensed with words. "I will return," she simply promised, "and if I cannot return, I will send a signal through the river." He nodded, briefly squeezing her hands before releasing them. "I trust in your strength, Aparecida, more than you yourself trust." With these words, he and the warriors retreated into the forest, leaving her alone on the path that descended to the village. Aparecida breathed deeply, adjusted the ceremonial necklace on her chest, and began to descend the hill. Aparecida's entrance into Vila Nova caused immediate commotion. Dressed in a combination of traditional Kalapalo clothes and the white dress she had worn on her wedding day, she walked with her head held high down the main street. Women whispered behind half-open windows. Men interrupted conversations to observe her pass. Children ran ahead, announcing her arrival as if it were an extraordinary event. And indeed it was. No one expected the kidnapped daughter of Colonel Mendonça to return of her own will, much less with that proud posture and determined gaze. The first to formally recognize her was Father Anselmo, who was leaving the small church when he saw her pass. The religious man, a man of advanced age who had served in that remote community for decades, had always had sympathy for the misunderstood young woman. "Aparecida," he called, making the sign of the cross as instinctive protection upon seeing the indigenous adornments she wore. "What are you doing here, your father? He said you were being held against your will." She stopped, looking at the priest with a new serenity. "As you can see, Father Anselmo, I walk by my own will. and I come to prevent blood from being spilled because of lies." The old priest immediately perceived the gravity of the situation. He approached, offering his arm as support and symbolic protection. "Come with me first. Your father is at the post with authorities from the capital. Better to prepare the ground before confronting him." Aparecida accepted the advice and the offered arm. As they walked to the parish house, she noticed how people looked at her differently. There was no longer the disdain of before, but an almost respectful curiosity. Or perhaps it was just fear of the unknown that she now represented. In Father Anselmo's modest room, protected by adobe walls and framed saints, Aparecida revealed her father's plans and the true purpose of her visit. The priest listened attentively, knotty hands intertwined on the worn table. "Your father has summoned authorities from Cuiabá," he explained after hearing everything. "He is determined to use your rescue as justification to expand the military presence in the region. There are interests at stake greater than a simple family conflict." "Diamonds?" asked Aparecida, surprising the priest with her insight. "Among other resources," he confirmed with a tired sigh. "The ambition of men is like a river in flood. It drags everything it finds in its path." A plan began to form in Aparecida's mind. "I need your help, Father, and Donna Zuleide's help." The name of the midwife and healer made the priest raise his grey eyebrows. "You two always had a special connection. She now lives on the outskirts of the village, after your father accused her of pagan practices." "I need to find her before confronting my father," said Aparecida, determined. "And I need you to gather as many people as possible to witness what I have to say, including the authorities from Cuiabá." The priest hesitated only for an instant, before nodding. "I will do what I can, but be careful, child. Your father is not a man who accepts challenges to his authority, especially in public." Donna Zuleide's cabin was on the periphery of the village, almost hidden among leafy trees. It was a simple construction of mud and straw, but the exuberant garden that surrounded it betrayed its residents' deep knowledge of the region's plants. The old mestizo woman, with dark skin marked by time and light eyes inherited from some European ancestor, showed no surprise upon seeing Aparecida at her door. "The embauba leaves had already warned me of your coming," she said, making way for the young woman to enter. The interior of the cabin was a universe of aromas, colors, and textures. Herbs dried hanging in bundles from the low ceiling. Clay pots lined up on rustic shelves containing ointments, powders, and various mixtures. In the center, a small syncretic altar gathered Catholic saints, crystals, feathers, and other elements that symbolized the hybrid wisdom of that woman who moved between worlds. "I know why you came," continued Zuleide, indicating a bench for Aparecida to sit on. "The confrontation approaches like a storm on the horizon. You seek weapons that are not of iron." Aparecida nodded, impressed as always with the healer's intuition. "I need to confront my father and the authorities, show the truth without bloodshed." Zuleide smiled, revealing the absence of some teeth. "Truth is like water. It finds its way through the hardest stones." She moved around the cabin, collecting various ingredients that she mixed in a small wooden mortar. "What do you plan, girl, who—" "Here's now a woman. To use their own game against them," answered Aparecida, finally revealing the plan she had conceived with the help of the Calapalo elders. As she spoke, she observed Zuleide's face transform, first with surprise, then with admiration, and finally with a smile of approval. "I see that you found your true voice among those whom the civilized call savages," commented the old woman when Aparecida finished exposing her plan. "You have my support and my wisdom at your disposal." Night fell over Villanova like a veil embroidered with stars. 3 days remained in the ultimatum. In the parish house, Aparecida prepared for what would come. Father Anselmo had managed to arrange a bath and clean clothes, but she kept the ceremonial Calapalo necklace over the simple dress. It was a fundamental part of who she had become. She would not give up that symbol. Alone in the small guest room, she remembered the package that Jandira had given her. "For when fear is greater than courage, the girl had said. Feeling the weight of solitude and responsibility, Aparecida decided that was the moment. She carefully undid the package of leaves, revealing its contents. A small straw doll, with simple but expressive features, adorned with a single red macaw feather. Along with it was a cord of woven fibers and a message written in faltering Portuguese, clearly dictated by the child to someone literate from the village. To remember that you are never alone. Strength does not come from the large body, but from the true heart. Tears came without warning, wetting the simple gift. Aparecida pressed the doll against her chest, feeling as if a piece of the village, and especially of Jandira, was there with her, strengthening her for the challenges that would come with the rising sun. The morning arrived with a fine rain, the kind of drizzle that doesn't prevent activities, but leaves everything slightly damp, like tears from the earth itself. 2 days remained in the ultimatum, but Aparecida knew she couldn't wait any longer. The moment was now. News had arrived during the early morning. Colonel Mendonça was mobilizing additional troops and had called a meeting with the authorities from Cuiabá to finalize the plans for rescue and occupation of Calapalo territory. The meeting would take place at the military post headquarters at noon. The provincial delegate, 2 businessmen interested in mineral exploration, and even a church representative who had come with the official entourage would be there. It was the perfect arena for what Aparecida was planning. Father Anselmo accompanied her to a certain point of the way, his black cassock contrasting with the reddish mud of the rain-soaked streets. "Be careful, child," he murmured before they separated. "Your father is like a wounded animal, more dangerous when cornered." Aparecida nodded, squeezing the small doll from Jandira, hidden in the pocket of her dress. "I prayed for you all night," continued the priest, "not only to the forces I know, but also to those you now revere. May they all protect you." It was the closest the old priest would come to recognizing the legitimacy of Calapalo beliefs, and Aparecida received those words as the precious gift they were. "Thank you, Father. You have always seen beyond appearances." They followed different paths, he to the church where he would gather the villagers for a special prayer that would serve as a pretext for everyone to be together at the right moment. She to meet Dona Zuleide, who awaited her behind Seu Januario's store, the only commerce in the small Vila Nova. The healer was already ready, carrying a basket covered with raw cotton cloth. She wore her best clothes, not because they were fine, but because they were clean and without visible patches. Her face, normally marked by a hard expression, had softened that morning, as if rejuvenated by the importance of the mission. "Everything is prepared," she said in a low voice, quickly, showing the contents of the basket, several small bottles containing liquids of various colors. "As we agreed, nothing that causes real harm, just enough to create the necessary effect." Aparecida nodded, feeling her heart accelerate. The plan was bold, almost reckless, but it was the only chance to avoid a bloody confrontation. With determined steps, the 2 women, the young and the old, headed to the military post. The fine rain continued to fall, creating an ethereal veil over the village that seemed to sense that something extraordinary was about to happen. The military post of Vila Nova was nothing more than a set of rustic constructions surrounded by a wooden palisade. The most imposing of them, where the office of Colonel Mendonça functioned and where the meeting was now taking place, was a 2-story house with a front veranda. 2 soldiers guarded the entrance, rifles resting on their shoulders, bored expressions on their young faces. They startled when they saw Aparecida approaching, accompanied by Dona Zuleide. "Stop right there," ordered the taller one, recovering from the initial surprise. "The colonel cannot be disturbed now." Aparecida continued advancing, the Calapalo necklace shining against her chest, even under the diffuse light of that rainy morning. "I am Aparecida Mendonça, daughter of the colonel," she declared with a firm voice that did not admit contestation. "And I need to speak with my father immediately." The soldiers exchanged confused looks. They had been instructed about the commander's kidnapped daughter, but the woman before them didn't seem remotely like a rescued prisoner. Furthermore, the presence of Dona Zuleide, whom everyone respected and feared in equal measure, complicated the situation. "The colonel is in an important meeting," tried to argue the second soldier, shorter and apparently more sensible. Matter of national security, miss. The true security of this region depends on what I have to say, countered Aparecida, taking another step forward. You can announce me, or I can enter without announcement. The choice is yours. Something in the determination of that woman, whom many of them knew as the commander's timid and insignificant daughter, made them hesitate. The shorter soldier finally nodded. Wait here. I'll inform the colonel. Less than 2 minutes later, the door opened violently and Colonel Mendonça himself appeared on the veranda, his face red with barely contained fury. He was a stocky man, with a greying moustache and small eyes that seemed to constantly calculate advantages and disadvantages. Upon seeing his daughter, he stopped for a moment, clearly surprised by her transformed appearance. Aparecida? His voice sounded like a contained growl. What does this mean? It means I've come to prevent a tragedy, father, she answered. Climbing the steps of the veranda without waiting for an invitation, Donna Zuleide followed her like a protective shadow, and it means the lies need to end now. Colonel Mendonça glanced at the healer, then at the soldiers who were observing the scene with poorly disguised curiosity, and finally inside the room where the illustrious visitors were waiting. Clearly deciding that conversation shouldn't happen in public, he made an abrupt gesture. Come in, but be brief. The meeting room of the military post was filled with the aroma of expensive cigars and the tension of interrupted negotiations. Around a dark wooden table, 4 men stood up when the women entered, more out of surprise than courtesy. The provincial delegate, a thin man with an astute look, 2 businessmen in impeccable suits despite the long journey, and a church representative in a clean cassock and cautious expression. Gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, said the colonel, trying to control the situation. My daughter, recently rescued from the savages, is still disoriented. I am not disoriented, Aparecida cut in with surprising firmness. I am here by my own choice to prevent a massacre based on lies. The silence that followed, those words was as dense as the humidity that permeated the air. Colonel Mendonça took a threatening step toward his daughter, but stopped upon noticing the attentive gazes of the visitors. The provincial delegate was the first to speak. What exactly is the young lady talking about? Aparecida breathed deeply, feeling the crucial moment approaching like a wave about to break. My father told you that I was kidnapped by the Kalapalo, that I am kept prisoner, that I need to be rescued. She made a deliberate pause, looking into the eyes of each man present. All of this is a lie. I was given in marriage against my will, as punishment for not meeting his expectations about how a daughter should be. Immediate murmuring filled the room. The church representative frowned, visibly disturbed. Colonel Mendonça, is this true? Of course not, thundered the military man, veins bulging in his neck. She has clearly been indoctrinated by those savages. Look at her, wearing pagan necklaces, accompanied by this witch. He pointed accusingly at Donna Zuleide, who remained impassive, observing everything with the attention of a patient predator. If I was handed over as punishment, why would I return of my own will? Argued Aparecida, keeping her voice controlled, despite the growing tension. And if the Kalapalo are so savage, why did they treat me with more dignity than I ever received here? The provincial delegate seemed increasingly interested in the unfolding of that unexpected situation. One of the businessmen, however, showed growing impatience. This is some kind of family drama, he interrupted. We have important business to discuss, Colonel. Control your daughter or ask her to leave. It was the trigger Aparecida had been waiting for. Donna Zuleide stepped forward, opening her basket and removing one of the bottles. Before continuing your important business, perhaps you should know what is really at stake. With a quick movement, the healer poured a few drops of the greenish liquid on the map that was open on the table, a detailed map of Kalapalo territory and surroundings, with markings of possible mineral deposits. Where the liquid touched, the paper began to change color, revealing invisible markings that weren't in the official version. Smuggling routes, locations of villages that had been accidentally burned in recent years, areas already illegally exploited. The complete plan. of an operation that went far beyond a simple rescue. "What trick is this?" vociferated the colonel, trying to snatch the map from the table, but being prevented by the provincial delegate, who now observed the markings with unequivocal interest. "It's no trick," explained Donna Zuleide with tranquility. "Just a mixture of herbs that reacts with the special ink your secretary uses for secret annotations, Colonel. The same secretary who has been selling information to both sides for years." The room exploded in crossed accusations. The colonel vociferated against the invasion and sabotage. The businessmen demanded explanations about the routes marked on the map. The provincial delegate began to ask uncomfortable questions about unauthorized operations. Chaos was installed, exactly as Aparecida and her allies had planned. It was at this moment that the second part of the plan came into action. A bell began to ring insistently, the church bell, in a rhythm that signaled emergency. By reflex, everyone went to the windows. In the central square of the village, visible even through the fine rain that continued to fall, a crowd was gathering. At the front, Father Anselmo. Beside him, to general surprise, was Ubirajara, accompanied not only by Kalapalo warriors, but also by representatives of other tribes from the region. And in the center of that improbable grouping, little Jandira, supported by her staff, looking directly at the window where Aparecida stood. "What does this mean?" asked the church representative, clearly confused at seeing a colleague in cassock alongside indigenous people. "It means it's over, Father," answered Aparecida, not to the religious man, but to Colonel Mendonça. "The whole village knows the truth now. Father Anselmo has gathered witnesses to your plan. Ubirajara has brought leaders from all the tribes affected by your illegal operations, and the authorities from Cuiabá," she pointed to the delegate, "and the church representative, now have proof of what is really happening here." Colonel Mendonça looked around like a cornered animal, seeking a way out. For a terrible moment, his hand moved toward the gun he carried at his waist. It was then that Donna Zuleide broke the second bottle, this one containing a yellowish powder, that spread in the air caused a coughing fit in everyone present. Amid the confusion, the provincial delegate managed to immobilize the colonel, removing his weapon. "Colonel Mendonça, you are temporarily removed from command," he declared, with renewed authority, as if that intervention gave him legitimate purpose. "Until all these accusations are properly investigated." The events that followed seemed to occur at an accelerated pace. The colonel was escorted to his quarters, effectively under house arrest. The provincial delegate temporarily assumed command of the post, immediately ordering the suspension of any operation against the Kalapalo. The businessmen, realizing that the wind had changed direction, quickly distanced themselves from the colonel's plans, claiming ignorance of any illegal activities. In the central square, as the rain finally ceased, giving way to a golden glow of late afternoon, a historic meeting took place. For the first time, official representatives of the government, the church, and the various indigenous tribes of the region sat down to talk as equals. Aparecida, now recognized by all as a natural mediator, moved between the groups, translating not only words but intentions and feelings. Ubirajara observed everything with a serene expression, intervening only when necessary to clarify important points about territorial rights. By dusk, a preliminary agreement had been drafted. Indigenous territories would be officially demarcated and protected. In exchange, specific commercial routes would be allowed, as long as they didn't interfere with sacred sites or essential hunting and gathering areas. A new commander would be sent from Cuiabá to replace Colonel Mendonça, who would face trial for his actions. When night fell over Villanova, Aparecida finally had a moment of quietude. Sitting on the veranda of the parish house, she observed the stars emerging in the clear sky after the rain. Ubirajara approached silently, sitting beside her without initial words, the comfortable silence of those who don't need to fill spaces with empty sounds. "We did it," she finally said, allowing herself to relax for the first time in days. "For now," he responded, realistic as always. "Papers and promises of white men are like footprints in the sand. The next tide can erase them." Aparecida nodded, understanding the truth of those words. That's why we need to always be vigilant, always ready to retell our story. He took her hand between his own, in a rare public gesture of affection. Our story, he repeated, giving special weight to those simple words. At that moment, little Jandira appeared, limping slightly toward them. Without asking permission, as was her custom, she sat on Aparecida's lap and nestled against her chest. "Old Jurema says you are like the tree that grows on the stone," said the sleepy girl. "No one believed it could flourish there, but its roots found the way." Silent tears rolled down Aparecida's face as she embraced the child. She looked at Ubirajara, then at the village that extended below, and finally at the forest in the distance, where firelight indicated the location of the Kalapalo village. She now realized that she didn't belong exclusively to any of these worlds, and simultaneously, she belonged to all of them. She was, truly, a bridge between realities. In the years that followed, Vila Nova was gradually transformed. The military post gave way to a center of coexistence where Brazilians of different origins and indigenous people of various ethnicities could trade, learn from each other, and resolve conflicts peacefully. Aparecida and Ubirajara built a house exactly on the border between the village and Kalapalo territory, a house that had doors facing both worlds. There they received both official authorities and tribal elders. They mediated agreements, preserved ancestral knowledge, and created new paths of understanding. Dona Zuleide established a school of traditional medicine, where her knowledge of herbs and cures was recorded and transmitted both to young indigenous people and to students coming from Cuiabá and even from Rio de Janeiro. Father Anselmo, already at an advanced age, found in his friendship with the Kalapalo shamans a renewal of his own faith, developing a form of spirituality that respected different traditions without losing its roots. And little Jandira, adopted by Aparecida and Ubirajara as a daughter of the heart, grew up to become a respected storyteller, traveling between villages and cities to keep alive the memory of what had happened there and what could happen when people decided to see beyond appearances. At the exact location where Aparecida had been humiliated in that forced marriage, a circular garden emerged over time. In it grew both medicinal plants known by Dona Zuleide and cerrado flowers that Ubirajara appreciated. In the center, a yellow ipe, the same type of flower that he had offered her on that distant day, stood majestic, its deep roots sustaining branches that opened to the sky like welcoming arms. And under its generous shade, children of all origins learned that the true beauty of the earth is not that which seeks to please superficial gazes, but that which sustains the world in silent and persistent flowering. If this narrative touched your heart, don't keep that feeling just for yourself. Share your connection with this story in the comments, subscribe for more journeys like this, and leave your like as a seed that, just like the Ipe of Aparecida,